All right, so now that we've created our protected route component and added that to all of the routes in our application so far, the next thing we need to do is be able to actually compute this isLoggedIn thing, which currently we just set to false. All right, so essentially what we're going to need to do, if we look in our note provider component, remember that this is where we set up the subscription for authentication changes, and we basically just used that to load the corresponding notes for a user when a user logged in. However, this really isn't the place for this kind of logic. Where it belongs is really inside its own custom hook. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a custom hook for getting the user's data. So what I'm going to do is we're going to create a new folder, which I'll call hooks. And inside of here, I'm going to create a new file, which I'll call useUser.js. And this is going to allow our components to get access to the current user in the application, and it's also going to set up this subscription. So let's take this stuff. We're going to just delete it. Well, not delete it. We're going to cut it, and then we're going to paste it inside our new component here. Once we create it, we're going to say export const useUser, or new hook, rather. I said new component, but I meant hook. And we're going to need to import a few things up at the top. Once we've pasted that, we're going to say use state and use effect. And we're also going to need to import those same things from Firebase auth here, so from React. And then from Firebase auth, as I said, we're going to need get auth and on auth state changed from Firebase auth. Cool, and now all we need to do is return these two pieces of state variable from our useUser hook, and we can actually change this to isLoading if we want to. And set isLoading, since there is no other isLoading now that it's in its own custom hook. And then we're just going to return those things from our custom hook by saying return. And we'll return an object here that contains both user and isLoading. And we need to also change set isLoading here. Okay, and now we can use this custom hook in our notes provider by saying import useUser. There we go, from our hooks directory, and then down here we're going to say const user, and we're going to have isLoading as well, although I don't actually think we'll need that at this point. We're just going to say const user equals useUser. Okay, and that will give us the user, which will make it so that we can access the UID of the currently logged in user if there is one. And that will also work down here in our create note function where we're using the user's UID to create a new note. So now that we have this useUser custom hook, we can also add that to our routes component and pass in whether or not a user is logged in accordingly. So let's see what that'll look like. We're going to say, here we'll import our useUser hook up here from hooks useUser. And then down here we're going to say const user and isLoading. We are going to use isLoading because remember our protected route has a loading prop that will basically display a loading message if we're not sure whether the user can access or not, so that we don't accidentally redirect the user prematurely. Okay, so we're going to say const user isLoading equals user, or useUser rather. And once we have that user, we're just going to say isLoggedIn equals, and then convert the user to a Boolean like that. Okay, so now we just need to add isLoading to each of our protected routes here. We're going to say isLoading equals isLoading. Same thing down here, isLoading equals isLoading. Down here too, isLoading equals isLoading. And let's put a space there. Same thing for all of these. isLoading equals isLoading. And isLoading equals isLoading. Okay, so we should be good to go now, finally. Let's go back and take a look at this. We're going to refresh our page. And sure enough, we'll see that little loading message when we refresh it. And if we log out, which you can simulate either by going into incognito mode here, which I'm just going to do here, new incognito window. And if you paste that in there, you'll see that that brings up the login page automatically. Okay, and now if you log into here by saying john@gmail.com, BC123, and click login, we'll see that that will take you to the notes page, just like we wanted it to. Okay, so it looks like everything is working now. We have access to our user, and we know now if the user is logged in at any given point in time. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.